I'm Anthropomantic Fiend, and I do horror-related things on the internet. So today I'm going to be doing the Trashed Picture Show's Sci-Fi Horror tag. Marty, over the Trashed Picture Show, tagged me to do this. Check out his channel, he's awesome. He doesn't just do horror stuff like I tend to do. He's got all kinds of awesome stuff from all around the different areas of nerdiness, horror, sci-fi, superhero stuff, lots of cool stuff on his channel, so please check him out. Without further ado, I'm just gonna get into the tag. What for you defines sci-fi horror? For me, sci-fi horror is horror that has some kind of either scientific or pseudoscientific basis, because a lot of my favorite sci-fi horror films, the actual science there is completely ridiculous, but I don't care because the movies are fun. There's definitely different forms this can take. You have movies where it's something that has been created by humans. It could be technology gone wrong, some kind of botched, horrible experiment, some kind of mutation. And then there's also horror movies where it's not something humans have created, but it is some kind of alien force that has either been provoked by humans or is just invading the world of humans for its own reasons. A lot of alien invasion movies go that way, but it's sort of different from other horror because the invading creature is not supernatural. It's some kind of force of nature, but there's some kind of scientific or pseudoscientific basis behind it. So there has to be science or pseudoscience behind whatever the actual source of the horror is in the movie for it to be sci-fi horror, in my eyes. What is your all-time favorite sci-fi horror? And this is really hard because I love a lot of movies that are sci-fi horror, so I grabbed a few movies that I considered before I settled on my actual choice. The very first movie I thought of was Metropolis, because this is one of the early masterpieces of science fiction. I even have a button for it on my jacket, and if I move the camera for a second, I have a poster behind me because I absolutely love Metropolis. If you haven't seen this, this came out in 1927, I believe, and it's a silent movie, but it's visually stunning. There's all kinds of sort of socio-political commentary in it, lots of religious imagery, and it's just a precursor for a lot of what would come in sci-fi and in horror in some elements. This did inspire elements of the original Frankenstein, but it is at its heart a science fiction movie and not a horror movie, so I didn't choose it. My other thought was The Invisible Man. This is basically a flawless movie. It's unsettling, it's hilarious in other places, and the effects for the time are fabulous. As much as I love this movie, the number one spot for my all-time favorite sci-fi horror movie had to go to another James Whale movie, which is not the original Frankenstein, but rather one of the mini sequels on here, which is Bride of Frankenstein. As much as I love the original Frankenstein, Bride brings just a lot more of everything into it. It's got the horror and the pathos of the monster and all of the great science fiction elements of the original. A lot of great electrical equipment designs and great makeup for both the monster and the bride. A really weird, wonderful scene with a bunch of different, like, tiny people about this high that the Dr. Pretorius has grown and is showing to Dr. Frankenstein, and lots of other great scenes of dark humor. It's a lot more stylized, there's an actual score to the movie, and it just amps everything up in a way that I enjoyed a lot more than the first one, as much as I love the original Frankenstein. I really don't have any problems with Bride of Frankenstein, aside from the fact that they did cut some things out of it that make some scenes seem weird. For example, there was a subplot with the character of Carl, who is the assistant character in this, also played by Dwight Frye, who played Fritz in the original. No, neither of them are named Igor. That's Bela Lugosi's character, who first appears in Son of Frankenstein. There's a subplot where he has been going around murdering people, and it's getting blamed on the monster, but they cut that out, but leave some of the scenes of people he has killed in, so it just seems like the monster has murdered them in cold blood, which goes against the monster's character. So other than that, flawless movie. Bride of Frankenstein is my all-time favorite sci-fi horror for many, many reasons. Favorite new or recently released sci-fi horror, and I struggled with this a little bit because I haven't watched as many newer sci-fi horror movies, but I chose a pick that isn't quite horror per se, but I went with it anyway, which is Godzilla, King of the Monsters. I thought it was an amazing movie in its own right, and it was also just a fabulous tribute to the original Godzilla movies. It's directed by Michael Dougherty, who directed Trick or Treat and Krampus, and much like in those movies, he shows this huge love for his subject matter. There's all kinds of references to the original Godzilla movies in elements of the story, in the soundtrack, just everywhere, and it weaves them in a way that is fun but doesn't feel too campy. It still feels grounded, and there's lots of great monster action, obviously, but it also gives enough focus to the human characters that you feel scared for them, and that's where the horror comes in. You're actually afraid for these characters because you care about them, and that's an element that I find lacking in a lot of the earlier kaiju films. It's really all about the monster fights, and when that is just people in rubber suits, it's fun, but if it goes on for too long, I start to zone out, and that happened a little bit with me near the end of Godzilla King of the Monsters, but not really. It was still a great movie, and I need to get a hold of a copy of that. So my pick for favorite newer sci-fi horror would be Godzilla King of the Monsters. Most underrated sci-fi horror, and for me this would be Demon Seed. I forget when this one came out. It was 70s or 80s-ish, but this is based on I believe a Dean Koontz novel. It's essentially a story about this sentient computer technology that programs this entire house that this woman lives in. AI becomes sentient and decides it wants a baby, so decides it's going to try to get this woman pregnant, and so basically traps her in her house and makes it impossible for her to call for help in any way with all these sort of really perfectly plotted out horrible plans. I had no idea what I was getting into the first time I watched this movie because I didn't even know I was going to be watching it when I started it, because I had set the DVR on the TV to record, I think it was Wes Craven's Swamp Thing, but the channel decided, you know what, we're gonna play Demon Seed in that time slot instead. So I ended up recording Demon Seed instead, and I watched that, and I just sort of sat there. I was like super tense the whole time, and it's basically just AI trying to rape somebody, and it's really, really disturbing to me. And it had great effects. I looked at some of the reviews from when it came out. It was not received favorably at all. People thought it wasn't that good or that scary, or they just thought it was alright. This thing was terrifying. It bored itself into my brain, and it was just like, nope, no. It's not disturbing enough that I would never watch it again, but it's a creepy one, and I know people have sort of started praising it a little bit more as of now, but I feel like it still doesn't get enough recognition. So the most underrated sci-fi horror movie in my eyes would absolutely be Demon Seed. Guilty pleasure sci-fi horror. This for me would be, I could pick any number of things, but none of them would actually be a guilty pleasure because I love a lot of really stupid movies, and yet I have no shame in loving them whatsoever because I love ridiculous, trashy things. So I just went with the first thing that came to mind, which was Mars Attacks. This is not even really a horror movie, it's more a spoof of 50s sci-fi horror, but it's Tim Burton and it's just loaded with dark humor, and I know there are a lot of problems with this movie. It stole one of its best jokes from Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, but I think this is a better movie than Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. Attack of the Killer Tomatoes has not aged well. I could make a joke about tomatoes going rotten there, but I'm not going to, except I already did, so Anyway, this movie is hysterical in my eyes. It's very much based on the trading cards of the same name, which basically just show these Martians engaging in a bunch of senseless violence on a bunch of people, and that's what the movie is. It's just ridiculous, cartoonish aliens killing people without any real rhyme or reason to it, and they're trying to figure out why, but there isn't really much of a reason. It's a Tim Burton movie. It's got this really bizarre, hilarious sense of humor, and I love this movie so much that my sister one year for Christmas got a t-shirt printed for me that said, "For dark is the suede that mows like a harvest" on it, which is part of the garbled translation of the Martian ambassador's speech in this movie, and I love that shirt so much. I still quote that sometimes. This whole thing is just absolutely hilarious. It's not a perfect movie, but I don't care. I love it. Since I don't really have a guilty pleasure, I'm just gonna throw out a few other wonderfully trashy movies that I recommend. Plan 9 from Outer Space is obviously one of the great So Bad It's Good movies. I love that movie to death. One of the movies I reviewed a while back is Dire Wolf, which is about a mutated wolf just going around killing people in gory fashion, and it's very campy but a lot of fun, so I'd recommend that as well. An unproduced sci-fi horror you would like to see made, and for me, I sort of struggled with this question for a while, so I was just sort of thinking, is there some sort of idea for a movie that I've had that I'd like to see made, or like a script that never went through? And I was sort of thinking back to unproduced scripts I had heard about, and one of them is, going back to this series of movies, an unproduced version of a script that would become House of Frankenstein, and I believe it was called The Devil's Brood at some point, but it was this huge monster mashup that included Frankenstein, Dracula, the Wolfman, but also, I believe, the Invisible Man and the Mummy, and I would like to see a straight-ahead horror movie using the Universal monsters again, not just Frankenstein, Dracula, and the Wolfman, but those two as well, and just seeing how well you could get all of those different worlds to converge and make it an actually interesting movie. It would be hard to make it scary at this point, because those characters are just so iconic and fun and sort of camp characters at this point, but I would absolutely watch a movie that mashed those characters up into one story and tried to play it straight with an actual gothic sci-fi horror storyline. I think the Dark Universe has kind of fallen through at this point, which I know that The Mummy from 2017 was a bad movie, but I enjoyed it, and I would like to see the Dark Universe happen again. I don't care if it's bad. I enjoy seeing the Universal monsters together. If it's bad, I always have the originals to go back to, so what the hell. Something akin to The Devil's Brood would be the unproduced sci-fi horror you would like to see, or I would like to see made. Maybe you would too, I don't know. Those are my answers for the tag. Now I'm going to tag some people. I'm tagging Mark of Horror, The Trash Stash, Hobbs Horror, and Cody Ray. That is my entry for the Trash Picture Show's sci-fi horror tag. This is a big, I believe it's his 300 subscriber milestone celebration tag, so please go over to his channel and give him some love. Thank you for checking out my video. Hopefully I'll see you in another one. Bye.